Friends, good evening and welcome to this new edition of the program. Uh, we were thinking to do something new. We have always been trying to do something new, and we thought that why not we do something on the Indian values, cultures, Indian heroes, and so on and so forth. And therefore, to start with, we thought that we would start a program on the uh, which will be captioned as remembering Indian heroes, because we have got so many heroes, and many of them have heard about them, many of them remember them only on their birthdays or centenaries. But possibly it is high time that we talk a little bit more about them. We try to look into the life at depth, little bit depth. And therefore, we thought starting this particular series, which will be known as Remembering Indian Heroes. And this will be once in a month. Every month, we will try to look into the lives of true great heroes of India from different fields. So we will have two speakers. Timing will be approximately, let's say, 20-25 minutes on each hero by a speaker. And remaining 5 minutes will be a discussion on the particular presentation which has been made. People want to add something, people want to reviews or put a query, whatever it is. So that means we say, let's say 5:05 to 5:35 will be the time allotted to the first speaker, and 5:35 to 6:05 or so will be the time allotted to the second speaker. So that's the type of the modalities or the modality of this particular program, we thought. And as we go along, we will see how we can modify this particular program. Today we are going to present. I thought that since it's a program, I talked to our senior colleague, Mr. N.K. Agarwal, and told him that why don't we join together and start this particular program. And therefore, he was kind enough to agree to my views. And today we will have discussions on two great leaders of the country. One is from the religious field, the spiritual field, Swami Vivekananda, which I'll be trying to share my thoughts on him. And followed by that, we will have a discussion on the completely different life from a different stream, a very great eminent scientist of the country, Dr. Homi J. Bhabha, and that will be shared by Mr. N. Agarwal. So we hope that this series will be useful to all of us, fruitful to all of us, not only as the senior citizens, but as the citizens of the country, it will be quite useful to us. And we would also like to hereby call the members to join us in this live storytelling of the great leaders. Swami Vivekananda does not need an introduction, because India had produced many heroes in the past. There was a break somewhere in between, but 19th century and the 20th century are the period where the India produced a. Let me put it like this way: that the 19th century and the 20th century early, approximately 100 years, India produced a large number of great heroes in different fields, whether we are talking about the science field, religious field, spiritual field, academic field. We had a political field, educational field. We have some of the greatest heroes coming up in India in the 19th century and the early 20th century. And one of the reasons could be the India Renaissance. Maybe partially the British education also helped it, though it's a debatable whether the British education helped it or not. But definitely there was an India Renaissance. People call it Bengal Renaissance, but I call it India Renaissance, which led the country in the 19th century and the 20th century. And Swami Vivekananda is a epitome of that Indian Renaissance. He was a great Hindu philosopher. He was a great Vedanta protagonist, and possibly one of the greatest souls, one of the greatest spiritual leaders produced ever in India after Adi Shankaracharya. It's not to undermine the other people. There were people. There were even the Guru of Swami Vivekananda, Swami Paramahansa. They were there. But if you look into the contribution of this particular gentleman within a very short span of 39 years of his life, it is a story by itself. It's a miracle by itself that how can a man contribute so much to the development, growth, and the philosophy of a particular country during the short span of 39 years. So he is an enigma by himself. I still remember the statement by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, very important statement, and he told that the India has produced the greatest of heroes, and that's the Lord Buddha. But if you look into the modern Indian history, it is not Mahatma Gandhi, but it is Swami Vivekananda who was the greatest hero India has ever produced. So I'm just trying to echo the values of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, that he was really a great leader. Once Rabindranath Tagore also talked about Swami Vivekananda, a very great one. He told that if you really want to study India, if you really want to study the Indian history, possibly you need to look at the life of Swami Vivekananda. Because if you look into the life of Swami Vivekananda, you can read the Indian history, not the Indian medieval history, but the Indian history of the 18th century and the 19th century. And Swami Vivekananda, he was not only an Hindu philosopher or Hinduism proponent, because that's a very narrow way of looking at what you call Swami Vivekananda's life. Swami Vivekananda actually talked about the amalgamation of all religions. If you to hear carefully of the very brief speech which was given by him in 1893 on 11th of September, the famous speech given at the World Religious Parliament in Chicago in 1893, that was on 11th of September. If you look at this particular speech and dissect the particular speech.
Sir, please unmute.
Who has made me mute? So what happens is actually if you look at the brief speech which was made by him, he talked about the greatness of all religions, but what he talked about essentially that all the religions ultimately convert into the Hindu philosophy. That's the bigger part. He told that as all the river waters flow into an ocean, and similarly all the religions ultimately flow into the greatest of all the religions, and that is the Hindu religion. So he was actually talking about congruence of the all religions. He was not talking about the supremacy of the Hindu religion, but he was talking about congruence of all religions. And he told the religion of all religions is the Hindu religion, because here it starts and here it ends. And all religions are actually the subsets of the Hindu religion. It is not talking about with a sense of arrogance. That's a quality of Swami Vivekananda. That's the philosophy of the Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda also is known for his very strong, passionate views about the upliftment of the poor people of the country, illiterate people of the country, and particularly the women empowerment. He was possibly one of the first Hindu philosophers who strongly talked about, in the contemporary India, he was the first Hindu philosopher who talked about the empowerment of the women, empowerment of the downtrodden. He gave a very powerful speech, many powerful speeches. One of the powerful speech in Calcutta, he talked about that if India is to improve, if India is to grow, if India is to develop, if India is to shine, if India is to become the prosperous, it is the poor people, they have to come together. It is illiterate people, they have to come together. The illiteracy is the biggest problem, the biggest obstacle in making a great India. And therefore, if you really want to make an India, a greater India and the prosperous India, the focus should be on education. The focus should be the illiteracy, alleviation. And the focus should be upliftment of the women. Today what we talk about, today we are 21st century, we are talking about the women empowerment. Today we are talking about education. Today we are talking about the new education policy. All these things were actually, if you look at the Vivekananda's life, Vivekananda talked about them more than 150 years before. And therefore he is known as one of the greatest sages that India has ever produced. And he is one of those few persons in India. I don't know any other person, but I am just using a very guarded word of few person, maybe he's the only person in India in whose memory 2 dates are commemorated. Normally in the memory of one person, 1 day is commemorated in India, but he is the only person, or he may be one of the few persons in the world actually, 2 dates are commemorated. His birthday, which is the 12th January, which is celebrated what is called as the Young Day or Youth Day, the Day of the Youth, National Day of the Youth, and the date on which he delivered the world famous speech on 11th of September 1893, that is called Universal Brotherhood Day. So you have got a gentleman, a sage, you call him a gentleman. Why you call him a sage? Those of you who have read about the life of the Vivekananda used to, whenever he used to travel, he traveled almost all over the world. He traveled all parts of the country. He traveled from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, do the 39 years of his life. Not 39 years of life, largely, but 4 to 5 years of his life. He traveled all over the country. He traveled from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. He traveled from east to west. He traveled from UK. He traveled to USA. He traveled to Japan. He traveled to Italy. He traveled to entire South Asian countries. You look at his entire life of the traveling monk or the traveling sage, you'll be surprised to know he used to carry only 2 things in his life. He used to carry a kamandulu. Kamandulu is called that water pot, the water pot, that's the one thing he used to carry. He did not used to carry with the dress. That Kamandulu used to carry, and he used to carry the books. And one of the books is to be Bhagavad Gita. And the second book, the people say it used to be The Limitation of the Christianity. There's a world famous book which is called Limitation of the Christianity. These are the two books he used to carry with him along with the Kamandulu. And that was the only asset. And that was the only asset he had throughout his life. So you can imagine a person who was born as a very rich family, very aristocratic family. His original name was Narendranath Datta. It's a very, very, what do you call, a good family, very, very rich family. He was as a person who had got a tremendous amount of a memory. Academically, if you look at the record of the Swami Vivekananda, probably he's one of the best in the country. He used to call he had a tremendous amount of a focus. He had a tremendous amount of a passion. He had a tremendous amount of a memory. People say, and it's a fact, but I'm not telling which is not a fact, it is a fact, that if you used to read a book from, let's say, page number 1 to page number 65, and within a minute he used to finish the page number 1 to page number 65, and he used to, if you ask him in any question, he will tell you it is remaining in the page number 33, third para. That is the answer. That is the type of the memory he had, and this has been proved time and again with interaction in India, interaction in the United Kingdom, interaction in the United States of America. The person had a tremendous amount of memory. So coming back, Narendranath Datta, academically brilliant child, at the age of 21 passes the BA degree from a very sophisticated college of Calcutta. A person with a tremendous amount of a merit, a person. He was very proficient in physics, chemistry, mathematics. He was also proficient in history, geography. He was also proficient in the Hindu philosophy at the age of 21. So that's up to the 1863 was the birthday. So 1884, that's the life of the Swami Vivekananda. But Swami Vivekananda always tried to find out the essence of truth. He always used to say, there's a life without the truth doesn't make any sense. So he wanted to know what is the essence of truth and where does the life begin from and what is the core value of life. And if I don't know the core value of the life, I cannot take India forward. That was his philosophy, that if I don't know the core value of life, I cannot take India forward. And therefore, he was searching for the truth. And incidentally, he fell into the influence of the Brahmo Samaj. That's a different type of concept. Let's not go into that. But Brahmo Samaj. But in that Brahmo Samaj, I mean to say, he was always asking a question that if I have to find the truth, I must see God. And therefore, his eternal question was, starting from his very childhood, was he used to ask everybody that, have you seen God? Have you ever seen Almighty? People say that God exists everywhere. People say that there is a God in stone. There is a people say God in the dog. People say the God in the cow and so on and so forth. But have you actually seen anybody has seen a God? And the answer nobody used to give. People used to laugh at him. And they were ultimately one of the Brahma Sabha, Devendranath Tagore. He was related to Kavi Rabindranath Tagore. He told him ultimately, yes, one person can tell you whether he has seen or God not, met Ramakrishna Parama. And that's the time when Swami Vivekananda came into the contact with his later on to be Guru, and that is the Ramakrishna Parama. And that was 1885 I'm talking about. That means that was the time when 1 year after the passing of the graduation by the Swami Vivekananda with a brilliant academic career, he met 1885 to Ramakrishna Paramahansa with a simple question, have you seen God? And Ramakrishna Paramahansa gave one line answer. He told, yes, I have seen God, but I cannot show you God. You have to see God by yourself. You try to see God by yourself and you will be able to see God. And Vivekananda was not very convinced. I mean, Narendranath Datta at that particular point in time, he was not very convinced because he said that I have been trying to see God, but I'm not able to see the God. Ramakrishna Paramahansa told, you try to see the God, you'll be able to see the God, but it is your God, you have to see it by yourself. And then came the death of Narendranath Datta's father. And when Narendranath Datta's father died, actually, the entire family edifice broke into pieces as far as the Narendranath Datta was concerned. He became very much poor, and there were a lot of debts on him. He went back to the Swami. Ramakrishna Paramahansa and told him that, can you pray for me? Can you pray for me? You say that you have seen the God, but can you pray for me? Ramakrishna Paramahansa gave again the answer, I cannot pray for you. You have to pray for yourself. If you want to get back your riches, if you want to get back your money, you pray for yourself. And that was the turning point in the life of Swami Vivekananda. When Swami Vivekananda went into meditation, he first time got a feeling of the existence of God. He got the feeling of the existence of Mahakali. He at the time realized that Swami Paramahansa is actually the epitome of, I don't say the epitome of the reincarnation, but he thought he is the epitome of the spiritual bigness of the world. And there started the journey of the Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, as a principal disciple of the Swami Paramahansa, Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And they had a tremendous amount of relationship. They have a tremendous amount of relationship, which is a very unfortunately that after a period of 3 to 4 years in 1888, because the story started in 1984, 1985 was the meeting with the Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and 1888 the Ramakrishna Paramahansa died. So hardly for 2 to 3 years of interaction with the Vivekananda had with the Ramakrishna Paramahansa, but that changed the course of the life for the Vivekananda altogether. And Swami Ramakrishna Paramahansa, before dying, he told one particular sentence to Vivekananda. Vivekananda told that you can see the God, but finally it doesn't make any sense if India is not awakened. And that was the start of the India awakening movement, India Renaissance movement by the Swami Vivekananda, and started the journey of the Swami Vivekananda. As I told you earlier, he traveled all over the country. He gave the talks about the Vedanta. He gave a talks about the six aspects of the Hindu philosophy to every part of India. He went to UK, he went to USA, and finally he landed up in the USA in the Harvard University. You know, when he landed up in Harvard University, one of the professors at Harvard University asked him, "Then why don't you give a talk over here, Swami? Why don't you give a talk over here?" And he gave a talk and was very well appreciated by the Harvard University professor. Swami Vivekananda's intention was actually to give a talk in the 1893, the Chicago World Parliament of Religion, but he was not getting an entry there. His problem was entry, and the Harvard University talk actually cleared that entry. And through the recommendations of some of the professors of the Harvard University, he got an entry into that Chicago World Religion. And 11 September 1893 was a transformation in the Hindu religious movement in the Western world, where the Swami Vivekananda gave his world famous talk, The Sisters and Brothers of America. The Sisters and Brothers of America, and after that there was a resounding clapping for a period of 2 minutes, and that changed the entire course of the life of Swami Vivekananda. He became popular, he became a hero, he became a sage, he became a monk, he became acceptable in the Western community, and he became actually the propounder and the philosopher of the Hindu philosophy in the Western part of the world. And therefore, today we say that he was a person who gave Vedanta and yoga to the Western world. When we say that he gave the Vedanta and yoga to the Western world, the starting point was at 1893. And after 1893, he traveled to the different parts of the UK and USA up to the 1895. Then he came back to the India. He traveled once again the different parts of the India. He made a second visit. Made a second visit to the USA and the UK. And in the second visit, two important things I would like to mention over here. In the second visit, in the 1895, he set up the Vedanta Center in California. He also set up some of the Vedanta institutes in other parts of the US also. And the most important part was that Bhagavati Nivedita induction into the Indian philosophical movement, into the Indian freedom struggle, into the Indian education will happen in the second visit of the Swami Vivekananda. So Nivedita means dedicated to God. She was an Irish lady. It's not a story on Bhagavati Nivedita, but let me try to say one line. She was an Irish teacher. She lost her husband, and she was in search of life once again, and she wanted to do something for the life. She incidentally met Swami Vivekananda, and Swami Vivekananda told her, "You come to India with me," and he gave her a name, Nivedita. Nivedita means Nivedan. It is a dedicated to the God, and she became one of the founding findings of Swami Vivekananda, a foreign person coming to India and starting a school in the memory of the Swami Vivekananda, and so on and so forth. That's a different story altogether. So these two things happened during the second visit of the Swami Vivekananda, that he set up certain Vedanta institutes today. You know, we have a lot of things in the Western world today. So we have ISKCON temples in the Western world today. We have a lot of things in the Western world today. But the founding stone by the Swami Vivekananda is the Vedanta setup. And therefore the people say that he brought Vedanta and yoga to the USA. He was the first phase of the Indian philosophy, first phase of the Indian religious phase that was accepted by the Western world. He came back to India in 1997. That was the second time he came back to the India. 1999 to 2002. That was the last part of his life, and that life was a very very phenomenal life for him, you know, because he has cut down the lectures at the time. He has cut down giving lectures because of the falling health, because of the fading health. Because he was not eating food. He was, you know, he was not maintaining any of his physical this thing. So he was he was becoming weak, but he did not want to compromise on the weakness, and therefore he cut down his lectures to a one-to-one tutorial type of a thing, and that became a very important part of his life. That's the time when his book on Raja Yoga was published. You know, he published a book also, which is called First Book on India, and Raja Yoga was the book published by him. He what you call started two journals in India. There is a journal in English which he started. I'll just tell you the name. I'm just forgetting the name. Just a moment, please. Yeah. The English journal is called Prabudaya Bharat, that is the English journal, and the Bengali journal is called Udbodhan. Udbodhan means, you know, newness. Udbodhan, Udghatan, that means beginning. That is the Bengali journal. He started the two journals. So look at this career of this particular person within the age of 39. Let me try to sum it up. Look at this career of this particular person. A monk, a sage, an academically brilliant person, a proponent of Hindu philosophy, a strong proponent of the women empowerment, a founding son of the literacy movement, an academic accomplisher in terms of publication, not only book. He also Herbert Spencer's book. Herbert Spencer, you know, is the father of the Darwinian movement. He translated his book Education into into English. It is the first translation of that particular book in English, actually, in India, actually. So he wrote book, he translated the book, he had two journals to his credit, and he had a phenomenal life. And he started the last thing what I wanted to, he started what is called Ramakrishna Ashram and Ramakrishna Mutt. These are two separate entities altogether. Ramakrishna Ashram is a philosophical aspect of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and Ramakrishna Mutt is a legal aspect of management of that Ramakrishna Ashram. And both this Ramakrishna Ashram and the Ramakrishna Mutt are located, their head office is located at the Belur, which is near to the Calcutta. And after doing all these things, on the eventual death of the 4th of July, 1902, Swami Vivekananda went into the meditation. He went to the meditation, and that meditation ultimately resulted to samadhi, and he died. A very peaceful and eventful life. What he could achieve in 39 years, possibly it is fathomless to believe. We can only talk about him, we can read about him, we can only discuss about him. There are hundreds of books available of the Swami Vivekananda. What I talk, maybe just 1/1,000,000th part of the Swami Vivekananda's character, actually. But my request to all of you would be, please look into the life of Swami Vivekananda, and if we can learn one principle from the life of Swami Vivekananda and inculcate into our life system, probably will be much better. Thank you very much. Anybody would like?
Yeah, next speaker will speak, or we can ask anything.
Anything. We can finish off this one, no?
Yeah, curious to know why didn't he veer towards politics?
Why?
Why he did not veer towards politics? He was an academician and propaganda of Hindus and everything.
Because he was.
See, it's not that he was not in politics. It's not right to say not politics, but he influenced the Indian politics rather than entering into the politics. You know, because he thought that he's a monk, he's a philosopher. But I forgot to tell you one thing. You can't believe this particular gentleman. He was instrumental in setting up Indian Institute of Science. It was he who told the Jamshedji Tata. Jamshedji Tata is the chairman of the Tata Group of Companies, who started the Tata Group of Companies, and for whom the Jamshedpur city is there today. He had a very brief meeting with Jamshedji Tata. He told Jamshedji Tata, you are doing so many things. Why did you start a good institute in the country? And that started the Indian Institute of Science. Now look at he influenced so many things in life I'm talking about. So that's the reason he thought that he will keep himself away directly from the direct politics, but influence policy. Possibly Mahatma Gandhi he could influence less. But if you look at all other leaders of the country, If you look at B.R. Ambedkar, if you look at Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, you could look at Bal Gangadhar Tilak, you look at Gokhale, you could look at any of these leaders. You look at Rabindranath Tagore, you look at Aurobindo Bose, you look at any of these leaders I'm talking about, who were born after Swami Vivekananda, after a gap of 20-25 years. There was no political leader in the country who was not influenced by the vision and the practice of the.
That's true. And there is a street by his name in Chicago, USA, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that.
There are several. Government has published 25 political stamp papers in his name in 25 different years. There are so many things.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So it is really very...
Sir,
yeah.
Sir, I am Prakash Praharaj here. I wanted to, Bina Madam told about his interest in politics. Let me tell you, his vision was much broader than these politics, what we understand. In fact, one of his quote was, he has given it, give me few men and women who are pure and selfless, and I shall shake the whole world. So he was aiming for something much bigger. And because India was suffering from poverty, one of his closest objective was to eradication of poverty, and let me tell you, emancipation of women. That was another of his also. So all these politics we are talking, his vision in fact incorporated all these broader prospects, and it is not in India, it is the whole world he wanted to, address the issue. In fact, sir, if you permit me 1 minute, I'll address one thing, I'll talk one thing about Swamiji. In fact, I am associated with Vivekananda Kendra, and after traveling all over India, he went to Kanyakumari and sat there on 25th, 26th and 27th of December 1892. He was sitting there in the mid-rock that time. You see that Kendra now established there, meditating on India's past, present and future. After that, he started his journey, in a bigger scale. Okay, so the Vivekananda Kendra we see at Kanyakumari, which is set up by Sri Eknath Nadande. It was based on the Swamiji's meditation of 3 days that was done in that rock. Okay, and there are some wonderful quotes of Swamiji I can quote, but I think time doesn't permit. But I am very impressed with the way Dr. Sengupta very briefly spoke about his great works and deeds. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say it was really very heartening to listen to you talk about him. In fact, you said one principle. Always when we think of Swami Vivekananda, thing that comes to our mind is courage. I always used to tell my students that whenever you're feeling very low, just take any speech of his and just read it. It will be a great tonic. And today, during the COVID situation, I think his thing can be a real motivator. He was a great social reformer. In fact, she was talking about it. In fact, he was the one who coined the word Daridra Narayan, where a person should learn to see Narayan not in temples, but also in the poor. So I think his thing will continue to guide everyone who choose to listen to what he says. And really, thank you so much for talking about him, sir. It was wonderful listening to you.
Thank you very much. I think we come to end of this first part of this discussion. Agarwal sir will take forward to the second part of the discussion, and that's an equally interesting gentleman, completely different area, completely a different type of gentleman, but he also transformed the country to a great future, Dr. Homi J. Bhabha. Agarwal sir, floor is open to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Namaskar. First of all, let me thank MRL and Dr. Sengupta for giving me an opportunity to share this platform. Now, right in the beginning, Dr. Sengupta told that he initiated the idea and asked me, what do you think about it? And I immediately jumped on that. I said, yes, this is a very novel idea. Then he further said that, okay, I am going to the first speaker. Would you like to join me? That left me flabbergasted. I said, where is he and where am I? Then he said, he is going to talk on Vivekananda, but I must talk something. I said, okay, how about Dr. Bhabha? And he said, yes, very promptly he said, yes. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And that's how this dialogue started. So now, I have heard the speech of Dr. Sengupta, such a fluent and forceful speech. Now, after him, I am feeling feeling very small. After such a gigantic personality, I am going to be totally anticlimax, such a small fellow, and giving a speech which is nowhere comparison to what Dr. Sengupta told just now. Anyway, I will try my best actually to share my thoughts with you. So I hope with these few words, I like to start. Now, I hope everybody must have heard the name of Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, H.J. Bhabha, the great Indian nuclear scientist. He is also aptly called as father of nuclear programs in India. I worked in BRC for 40 years, and during that period, I had an opportunity to see him and also hear him also. So I would like to share some thoughts about his life and achievements with this August gathering here. Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, the great Indian nuclear founding scientist and professor of physics at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, TIFR, and also known as father of the Indian nuclear program, was born in a Parsi wealthy family on October 30th, 1909. His father was Jahangir Hormuzji Bhabha and mother Mehrin. He was related to businessman Dinsha Manekji Petit and Dorabji Tata. After his schooling in India, he went to UK to join Royal Institute of Science in 1927 and then the Cambridge University. Bhabha received his doctorate in nuclear physics. He then completed his doctoral studies in theoretical physics. During his studentship, he also worked with the great scientist Niels Bohr in Copenhagen. After an illustrious career, he returned to India in September 1939 with the hope that he'll come back to England and pursue his further studies. But as things would happen, soon after the World War broke out, he could not return to England. On the request of Nobel laureate C.V. Raman, director of the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, he accepted a readership in the institute. Am I audible clear? Am I clearly audible? Okay, thank you. With the support of Mr. J.R.D. Tata, he established the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, TIFR, in Bangalore in less than 2 months of receiving a grant of rupees 45,000 from Sir Dorab Tata Trust. 6 months later, Bhabha shifted the institute to Bombay in 1949. So TIFR was the cradle of India's atomic energy program. So this is how TIFR and atomic energy is connected. During the period, he came in contact with Jawaharlal Nehru and convinced him to start the nuclear energy program in India. He asserted that we should not lag behind in this very important matter. He knew that atomic energy would play a vast and dominant part in the future shape of things. Visionaries such as Nehru and Bhabha had every reason to dream of large-scale production of nuclear power in India. Bhabha wrote to Nehru on 8th of August 1954 regarding the need to setting up of atomic energy establishment at Trombay, uranium processing and prospecting plants to produce heavy water and beryllium, a uranium enrichment plant, atomic power plants, breeder reactors, and a plutonium extraction plant. In addition to these nuclear things, he also added the need for training and development of labor, supporting and financing research in the universities and research institutes, and developing and promoting the use of tracers in biology, medicine, and industry as subsidiary activities. Atomic Energy Establishment Trombay, that is known as AEET, was started in 1954 for technology development for the atomic energy program, which was later on renamed as Bhabha Atomic Research Center, that is BARC, in his honor. Bhabha had a great organizational capacity. Bhabha proposed to Nehru the setting up of a 3-member Atomic Energy Commission directly under the Prime Minister, as secret matters cannot be dealt with under the present board. He was not very confident that the present board is capable of handling the national secrets. Soon after the Indian Parliament passed the Atomic Energy Act 1948, the central government set up the Atomic Energy Commission in the erstwhile Department of Scientific Research on 10th of August 1948, and Bhabha was appointed as its first chairman. He was an outstanding scientist, an able administrator, and a tough negotiator. You will see he is the negotiator also. As desired by Nehru, Bhabha sat with those at the top echelons of the bureaucracy, discussed, debated, and negotiated, and secured for his department full powers to make its own appointments without reference to the Union Public Service Commission. Number 2, to carry out civil engineering works through its own civil engineering division and without reference to the Central Public Works Department. And lastly, to make its own purchase of equipments and supplies without reference to the Director General of Supplies and Disposal. Nehru's faith in science and technology, his genuine respect for Dr. Bhabha, and their burning ambition works synergistically to place India on the nuclear map of the world. Nehru supported his strategy to solve many big and small intractable issues. When scientists were commissioning the Apsara reactor, there was no canteen in Trombay. Scientists needed transport on a 24-hour basis as they need to work round the clock during the time when the reactor is going to be made critical. Now, this critical is not something that we hear about the hospitals, that is patient's condition very serious and things like. This critical means starting of the nuclear reactor and its reactions. Government rules did not permit such demands. Dr. Bhabha argued effectively against the outdated government rules and procedures and succeeded in getting Nehru's agreement to providing cars for the scientists on a 24-hour basis, arrange lunch and dinner for them in the reactor building at Trombay from an appropriate restaurant. Nehru addressed Dr. Bhabha as my dear Bhumi. This was the close relationship. To Dr. Bhabha, Nehru was my dear Bhai. Their interpersonal relationship is worthy of emulation at every level in these troubled times. Nehru and Dr. Bhabha had no ego clashes. Nehru frankly revealed his mind whenever the need arose. Now, Bhabha was of the very firm opinion that any visit by any VIP must be purposeful. It's just not a go and fly by. Dr. Bhabha insisted that the visits by VIPs must be purposeful. It is important that visitors who come here for talks with us should commence their discussion after acquiring a fair knowledge of what we have achieved so far and what we are planning to do in the near future. For this purpose, it is desirable that such visitors be taken around Trombay and TIFR before anything else is done. This may be followed as a general rule and deviation made only in exceptional cases. And this came in view of the fact that after discussions, many people would just ask, what are you doing? What are you doing there? And so on and so forth. So he made it very clear that first you take them around, let them see what we have done, what we are going to do, and then only you discuss with them whatever they don't understand or whatever questions they have. Now, in addition to his being a scientist, he was a great lover of nature and trees. Dr. Bhabha was a great lover of nature and trees. Dr. Bhabha gave priority to the afforestation program, planting over 15 lakh trees to cover all the barren portions of the Trombay Hill, completed on a task force basis, even before the erection of the main laboratories. 15 lakh trees to be planted on barren hills. It's not a small job. Today, the whole area looks green. In fact, it's because of these green hills, the residential colony Anushakti Nagar in Trombay, outside the BRC complex, is much cooler compared to the areas just outside the colony and in Mumbai city. Some criticized him for giving priority to planting trees. It's very obvious that a scientist is talking about planting trees and spending money. Dr. Bhabha replied, the trees take their own time to grow, whereas laboratory construction can be accelerated artificially. So this was his idea about nature. In July 1959, Dr. Baba spent 2 days in Cambridge in connection with conferment of an honorary degree of Doctor of Science on him. Seeing some beautiful roses at the back of where he was staying, Dr. Baba said, "I have never seen such beautiful profusion of roses as was to be found in his garden at the back adjoining the river." Now, it was believed impossible to grow roses in Bombay. That is the situation even now also. Other plants come up, but roses find very difficult to be grown properly. However, with Dr. Baba's initiative, AET started to grow roses, and in 1960, there were as many as 750 named varieties of roses growing successfully in the Rose Garden in Trombay. No wonder Baba played a prominent role in the Citizens Committee for Beautiful Bombay also. Dr. Baba's contribution to Trombay as a lover of trees, gardens, and flowers is legendary. Dr. Baba could not tolerate cutting down trees as an inevitable fallout of development. He went out of his way to save trees, even going to the extent of changing plants. He transplanted many full-grown peepal, banyan, Bentonia trees where the new buildings of BRC employees were to come up. Expenses did not deter him. One big tree in front of one of the residential buildings of BRC employees on Pedder Road in Mumbai city, blocking the view of the road, was overnight uprooted and transplanted with police assistance and transported and transplanted actually. In AET, the road alignment was changed to save a 100-year-old mango tree. In the new TIFR campus, a rain tree stood in the way of the approach road. It was not possible to change the road alignment, so the tree was transplanted elsewhere on the campus. Dr. Baba used to take keen interest in the vast lawns spread across almost the whole BRC and used to get angry if he saw anybody walking through the lawns instead of on the footpaths provided for walking. Dr. Baba had a great love for art and culture. Baba himself was also a painter and a classical music and opera enthusiast, besides being an amateur botanist. Baba was a great lover of good music. He himself was a very good piano player. He had love for painting, and many of his paintings decorate the walls of TIFR and some prominent places in BRC. Dr. Baba had a great sense of aesthetics. When the engineering halls were to be painted from outside, Dr. Baba made several visits from his office in city to BARC, where they used to keep several colored combination painted panels on the walls for him to see before the final decision was made. In another instance, when the construction was going on for the modular laboratory building, the longest building in Asia at that time, the design of overhanging cement grills, size of panels, etc., in the front portion could be finalized only after inspection and approval from Dr. Baba, after several visits by him, along with head civil engineering division BRC. Now, Dr. Baba represented India in the International Atomic Energy Agency's IAEA conferences and served as president of the United Nations Conference on the Peaceful Uses of Atomic Energy in Geneva, Switzerland. He was awarded the Adams Prize in 1942 and Padma Bhushan 1954, and was also nominated for the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1951 and 53 to 56. Unfortunately, at that time, due to some local politics going on, the people from South Asia were not considered actually very favorably for awarding of nuclear Nobel Prizes. Dr. Baba desired that in the atomic energy circles, Trombay should be globally known as Atomic Energy Center of India, the way Harwell was for British Center and Saclay for the French one. In India, nuclear energy is making very valuable contributions. It is extensively used in the field of agriculture, sterilization of food products, medical diagnosis, and treatment of various life-threatening diseases like cancer, thyroid, diagnosis of various body parts using CAT and PET, various industrial applications like radiography, desalination of seawater to fresh water, etc. in addition to its major application in electricity production in the various nuclear power plants. I was fortunate to see him from a distance, of course, whenever he was making a visit to BRC and standing in the on the road, eyeing the painted sample panels in front of the building where I was sitting. So through the window, I could see, because whenever he was coming to Trombay, there used to be something like a commotion. Oh, Dr. Bhabha is coming. He is going to see the panels and all that. And I was in one of the buildings just adjacent to that road. So we used to come on the windows and used to see him squatting down on the road, trying to see the painted panels from different angles and so on. I saw him at a meeting held in Trombay. I heard him also on Sunday, 21st January 1966, to condole then Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri's premature death. When the meeting was over, Dr. Bhabha heard the sad news of the suicide of a young scientist in the Technical Physics Division of BRC. Dr. Bhabha went to the hospital and spent a lot of time there. He postponed his journey to Geneva. That was his concern for the people working in BRC. While flying to Geneva on Kanchenjunga, an Air India plane on January 24th, 1966, to attend a meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Scientific Advisory Committee in Vienna, Austria, Dr. Bhabha died in a plane crash near Mont Blanc in Alps. That is a very sad incident. The whole BRC was overshadowed with sadness. And even today, till today, I'm told that the wreckage of those planes, that plane has not been found. And there are a lot of stories about that. Dr. Bhabha was the person who put India on the nuclear global map, along with other advanced countries like USA, UK, France, USSR, etc. Dr. Homi Bhabha will always be remembered for his invaluable contribution to the development of nuclear energy and its contribution to the humanity through its various applications in the country. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Great presentation, Agarwalji. Yeah, question. Anybody would like to add something?
Yeah, I would like to add something.
I would like to speak.
Hello.
Boliye, sir. Sir, boliye, sir. Please.
You see, I have worked in TFR right from 68 onward, right up to 1987. Now, Bhabha was so particular and meticulous in his views that anybody want to put any nail, even on any wall, he has to be approached Dr. Bhabha to put a nail in the room itself, any wall, no wall. And I think Dr. Agarwal has talked about his various personalities. He was very meticulous in his ways. For example, TFR had a East Canteen and West Canteen. And West Canteen means it's a Western food. Mostly you are not allowed to use spoon. Mostly it was fork and knife. And security officer was there. Once I remember initially when I joined, I came from North India. So we didn't know how to use fork and knife. So security officer, Commander Dada Bhai, he came to me. He said, gentlemen, this is how you have to try to eat the thing. So he was very, very particular and meticulous in his ways of thinking and approach. And he was so minor into everything, minuteness of the thing, that nothing can be tolerated except the best of the thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to
let me add something to it.
Yeah.
The Pedder Road building is located in the heart of Mumbai city, and there we had our building. The whole building was occupied by BRC, and that building has got small balconies actually in front of it, which is facing the road. Now people used to put their washed clothes actually. Yeah. They used to hang it on the strings, right in the balconies, and they used to give very shabby appearance. So there was an office order from Dr. Bhabha that no more hanging of these clothes in this place. And if anybody is found, his occupation will be terminated. So that was the type of meticulousness he had actually in his views. Thank you.
Actually, I want to add one more thing. Kenilworth is a building where the Homi Bhabha started his workshop. That is the first place in Bombay. They started all the scientific activity, making some instruments and things like that. So there was a very small shed. Now, of course, you see a very huge building, but Kenilworth on Pedder Road is the first place where they started all the activity. Bhabha started with few people there and here and there. Thank you.
And I would like to share a few words. Like, sorry, I'm Aarti Kalyan Raman here.
Yeah.
Able to hear me?
Go ahead. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
After a long time to hear about Dr. Homi Bhabha from Mr. Agarwal, it was really nice because my father was he was working with him as a personal administrative officer. He was working with him for 10 to 15 years as his personal administrative officer. And I've heard a lot about him, even after this thing. And we have his paintings still. What he was talking about, the paintings, those paintings are still there with us. Like, because he gave it to my father and those paintings are there. And he was also so concerned about his employees that he saw to it that any problem, anything, it was solved immediately. Like, he was really concerned for his employees. Because that's what I just would like to share, like, with you. Okay?
Good.
Agarwal ji, thank you so much for your detailed this thing. It's really appreciable for a scientist to be so concerned about it. I have seen only one more person, that is Honorable ex-President Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, like this in the same way. And you talked about his passion for trees and greenery. It makes a real importance on today's Biodiversity Day. It's really pertinent to say that I belong to Chembur and his greenery is really appreciable.
Then you can appreciate that.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
In fact, Chembur was supposed to be gas chamber, particularly the areas around RCF and all that.
Yes.
And we were also staying in Sarasbag, where the greenery is so much in Sarasbag, also near BRC. So many trees are planted in this thing, Sarasbag. It is really good. Very nice, this thing.
In fact,
thank you.
At one stage when people were criticizing me actually for spending so much money, Dr. Bhabha had responded that no power is costlier than no power. This is his famous statement, which means if you want to develop economically, you have to have power to run your industries. And at whatever cost the power may come, because that time we were thinking of importing reactors. So he said that no matter what it costs, I must have power so that my industry can run and my country can progress. So this was his views right in the beginning, and right at that time when nobody had thought about mass scale production of nuclear energy, nuclear electricity power. Thank you.
Anybody would like to add anything?
If there are no more questions, I would say thank you very much, all of you, for giving such appreciating comments. And I am really grateful to you for giving me an opportunity to share this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think the first episode went off very, very well. We look forward to our second episode by the end of the June. We will have the second episode. Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Agarwal and Dr. Sengupta.
Thank you very much, sir. Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
Enlightened.
Very informative session for two personalities of our great India.
No, this session was completely unique session, which really we enjoyed a lot and good information.
And we are very pleased to hear Dr. Sengupta's knowledgeable and of wisdom and share with us, brighten us every day to improve ourselves. Thank you, sir, very much.
That's what I was also going to say.
We are lucky
Dr. Sengupta, sir,
to increase our knowledge. We are lucky to increase our knowledge. Thank you, Sengupta, sir.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, Agarwal.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal ji. Thank you, Agarwal ji.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.